He spent $10 million on the wedding of the century. The guest list included CEOs, politicians, and some of the most powerful names in American business. She looked perfect. Elegant. Devoted. Untouchable. The kind of woman men write poems about and other women quietly envy. He had waited a long time to feel this way again. He told his best friend the night before the ceremony, "For the first time in years, I feel like everything makes sense." But by sunrise, he knew he had married a snake. A locked phone screen. A bank transaction alert he never authorized. A second phone tucked beneath a folded evening gown. A deleted text thread that had somehow left a ghost of itself behind. A man sitting alone in a suite that cost $12,000 a night, staring at surveillance footage from his own wedding, trying to understand how the most beautiful night of his life had become the beginning of the most devastating chapter he had ever lived. What he discovered that night would destroy reputations, expose a calculated plan years in the making, and force him to make a decision that shocked even his closest advisors. And here is the part that will stay with you long after this video ends: she never panicked. Not once. Before we continue, if you enjoy real stories about power, betrayal, and people who fight back against those who underestimate them, subscribe right now. Because this story only gets more intense from here. Before we go any further, let's be honest about something. When we hear a story like this, a billionaire, a beautiful woman, a lavish wedding, and then betrayal, our first instinct is to assume the man was naive. Foolish, even. We think, how does someone that successful not see it coming? But that question misses the point entirely. Because what happened to Marcus Hale, a name we're using to protect the identities involved, was not the result of naivety. It was the result of a masterclass in calculated deception. A performance so precise, so layered, and so patient that even the people who loved him most never saw it either. So before you judge, ask yourself this: have you ever trusted someone completely? Have you ever looked into another person's eyes and believed, without a single doubt, that they were exactly who they said they were? Because that is exactly where Marcus was. And that is exactly where she wanted him. Was she ever truly in love with him? Was the marriage itself the real goal, or just a step in a much longer plan? How long had she been building this? And what did he do when the full picture finally came into focus? Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was strategy. Executed with the coldness of a corporation and the warmth of a lover. Marcus Hale grew up in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. His father drove a delivery truck for 31 years. His mother worked the front desk of a local dentist's office. They were not poor, but they were never comfortable either. Marcus remembers watching his father count change at the kitchen table before the bills were due, and that image, that quiet, private humiliation, became the fuel that would drive him for the next 4 decades. He was not the smartest kid in his class. He was not the most talented. But he was relentless. He started his first business at 22 with a loan he could barely afford, a used van, and a phone he answered every single time it rang. By the time he was 35, he had turned a regional logistics company into a national operation worth $300 million. By 45, diversified investments in technology, real estate, and energy had pushed his net worth past $1 billion. The Wall Street Journal profiled him twice. Forbes put him on a regional list. But those who knew him said Marcus never changed. He still drove himself to work most mornings. He still called his mother every Sunday. He was the kind of man who earned respect not because of what he owned, but because of how he treated the people who worked for him. But Marcus had one wound that never fully healed. His first wife, Carol, had died of a rare autoimmune disease 7 years earlier. They had been married for 19 years. They had 2 adult children together. And when she died, something in Marcus quietly closed. He became more disciplined, more private, more guarded. His inner circle grew smaller. His trust became harder to earn. For nearly 6 years after Carol's passing, Marcus dated no one seriously. His friends worried. His children gently pushed. But Marcus wasn't ready. He had seen what it felt like to love someone completely, to build a life with someone, to become so intertwined with another person that losing them leaves a hole that no amount of wealth can fill. He was not in a rush to feel that kind of vulnerability again. And then he met Vanessa Cole at a charity gala in Manhattan, on a Thursday evening in late October. She was 38 years old. She was warm without being aggressive, beautiful without being vain, and sharp without being intimidating. She laughed at herself easily. She asked questions and actually listened to the answers. She was wearing a navy dress, and she was talking to a group of nonprofit directors about early childhood literacy programs with the kind of genuine passion that makes you stop and watch a person from across the room. Marcus's business partner, Daniel, noticed him staring and said, "You going to introduce yourself, or just admire her from here all night?" Marcus laughed and said, "Give me a minute." He needed a minute. Because something about her made him nervous in a way he had not felt in a long time. And Marcus Hale was not a man who got nervous easily. They talked for 2 hours that night. She told him she had grown up in Georgia. That she had worked in nonprofit management for most of her career. That she had been in a serious relationship years ago that had ended painfully, and that she had spent the years since focusing on her work and her own peace of mind. She was thoughtful. She was measured. She didn't try to impress him. And that, more than anything else, was what drew him in. Because Marcus had been around enough people who wanted something from him to recognize the hunger behind polished conversation. Vanessa didn't seem to want anything. She seemed, remarkably, to simply be present. His closest friend, Robert, met her a month later and told Marcus, "She's the real deal. She softened you. I haven't seen you laugh like that in years." His daughter, Priya, had dinner with them and said afterward, "Dad, she actually looks at you when you're talking. She's good for you." His son, James, was more cautious, but even he admitted, "She seems genuine. I hope you're happy." And Marcus was. For the first time since losing Carol, he was genuinely, quietly happy. They dated for 2 years. Long enough for the relationship to feel grounded. Long enough for Vanessa to become a regular presence in Marcus's world, at family dinners, at company events, at weekend trips to his home in Connecticut. She never pushed for anything. She never asked about money. She let him lead the relationship at his own pace. And slowly, the guards came down. But there were things, small things, that Marcus would later say had always sat slightly wrong with him, even if he had never allowed himself to focus on them at the time. Vanessa never talked much about her past. When he asked about her family, the answers were brief and quickly redirected. Her phone was always face down on every surface, in every room. She never took calls in front of him if she could help it. And when the topic of a prenuptial agreement came up, something Marcus's legal team had prepared as a matter of routine, Vanessa's reaction was the first time he had ever seen something behind her eyes shift. She didn't refuse. She didn't argue. But she pushed back quietly, persistently, over the course of several weeks, suggesting that a prenup would signal distrust and undermine the foundation of their marriage. Marcus's attorney, a woman named Sandra who had worked with him for 15 years, told him privately, "Marcus, most reasonable people understand a prenup at your level. The resistance is worth noting." He noted it. He also, in the end, restructured the agreement in a way that felt like a compromise. He loved her. He didn't want to begin their marriage in a courtroom. And then, just 3 weeks before the wedding, Vanessa made one unusual request. She asked that a specific clause be added to the joint account structure they had been setting up. A clause that would give her access to a secondary operational account during travel and business emergencies, when Marcus was unreachable. It seemed reasonable on its surface. They were going to be married, after all. What was his was hers, and what was hers was his. That's what marriage meant. His attorney flagged it. Marcus told Sandra, "Let it go. We'll revisit after the honeymoon." Sandra signed off. But she kept a copy of every document. The wedding took place on a Saturday in June, at a private estate in the Hudson Valley that Marcus had rented for the weekend at a cost that made even his closest friends raise their eyebrows. $10 million, all in. The floral arrangements alone cost more than most American families earn in a year. There was a live orchestra, a Michelin-starred catering team flown in from Chicago, and crystal chandeliers that caught the late afternoon sun and scattered light across the lawns like something out of a dream. 412 guests attended, including 2 sitting senators, the CEOs of 3 Fortune 500 companies, and a Grammy-winning musician who performed during the reception. It was, by every measure anyone applied that evening, the most beautiful wedding any of them had ever attended. The bride was radiant. Her dress had taken 7 months to make. She walked down the aisle slowly, the way people do when they want to remember every second. And when she reached Marcus at the altar, he took her hands, and his eyes filled with tears. "I never thought I'd feel this again," he told her quietly, off script, in front of everyone. The crowd responded with a collective sound, that soft exhale of 400 people simultaneously moved by something real. His daughter Priya cried. His son James, the cautious one, allowed himself a smile. Robert, his oldest friend, raised his glass from the second row and gave Marcus a single nod that said everything. And Vanessa looked at him with those steady eyes, and she said, "Neither did I." But at 9:47 p.m. that evening, while the reception was still in full swing and the dance floor was crowded and the champagne was flowing, the head of Marcus's private security detail, a quiet, meticulous man named Terry who had worked for Marcus for 11 years, noticed the bride slip away from the reception through a side door near the catering entrance. He noted the time out of habit. It was part of his job to know where everyone was. He did not think much of it. People needed air. People needed a moment. He checked again at 10:08 p.m. She had not returned. He flagged it internally and sent one of his team to do a quiet sweep of the estate. She was found at 10:11 p.m. in a small room off the main corridor, near the estate's administrative office. She was on a phone. Not the phone Marcus had seen her use before. A different phone. She saw the security team member in the doorway and ended the call immediately, smiled, and said she just needed a moment of quiet. It was a reasonable explanation. The security team member reported it to Terry. Terry filed it in his nightly log, said nothing to Marcus that evening, and made a decision he would later describe as the most important professional call of his career. He kept the entry. At 1:22 a.m., after the guests had gone and the staff was clearing the last of the reception, Marcus and Vanessa moved to the bridal suite. It was a room that felt like a museum piece, tall ceilings, original stonework, candles still burning on every surface. Vanessa excused herself to the bathroom to change. Marcus loosened his tie, sat on the edge of the bed, and noticed her laptop on the small writing desk near the window. He was not snooping. He was not suspicious in that moment. He reached over to close it, it had been left open, the screen still lit, and that is when he saw it. Not a message. Not a photograph. A financial dashboard. His financial dashboard. Not Vanessa's. Not a joint account. His private account structure, the one only his CFO and his attorney had full access to. On her screen. And beneath that tab, visible in the browser history that she had not cleared, a transfer request. Scheduled for 6 a.m. $58 million. Routed through an account he did not recognize, tied to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands that had been incorporated, he would later learn, for months before their first date. Marcus sat very still for a long time. He did not yell. He did not confront her when she walked back into the room. He closed the laptop carefully, set it back where she had left it, and smiled when she appeared. "You ready to sleep?" he asked her. She said yes. He said, "Me too." And he lay next to his wife in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and felt the entire architecture of the last 2 years rearrange itself inside his mind. Every quiet phone call. Every redirected question. Every small push on the prenup. The clause about the operational account. The unusual request. The second phone. Terry's log entry. And the words she had spoken at the altar, "Neither did I," replayed in his mind with a meaning that turned his stomach. This was not love. This was infiltration. If you've made it this far in this story, drop a comment right now and say, "I'm still here." And tell me, what state or country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story is reaching. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Marcus did not sleep that night. He lay still and he breathed slowly and he let her sleep beside him because the most important thing in that moment was that she not know what he had seen. At 5:15 a.m., 45 minutes before the scheduled transfer, he quietly slipped out of bed, went to the adjoining sitting room, and called Sandra on her personal cell phone. Sandra answered on the second ring. When he told her what he had seen, there was a pause. Then she said, "Don't touch anything. Don't move any money. Don't say a word to her. I'm calling the forensic team right now." The transfer was blocked through a combination of emergency authorization revocations that Sandra had prepared as a precautionary protocol years earlier, a protocol Marcus had signed off on when he restructured his asset protection trust and never once thought he would actually need. By the time Vanessa woke up, showered, and came into the sitting room where Marcus was reading the newspaper with a cup of coffee, the transfer had already been cancelled at the source. She had no way of knowing that yet. He handed her a coffee. She kissed him on the cheek. He smiled and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Hale." Over the next 3 weeks, while the public world saw two newlyweds honeymooning in the south of France, Marcus was running one of the most methodical private investigations of his life. He called in a firm he had used once before during a corporate espionage case, a team of forensic accountants, digital analysts, and private investigators who operated with absolute discretion. He did not tell his children. He did not tell Robert. He told only Sandra and Terry, the two people who had already seen enough to understand that discretion was everything. What the team found in those 3 weeks was not what anyone expected. It was worse. Vanessa Cole was not her real name. Her legal name was Vanessa Carver, and she had been born in Memphis, Tennessee, not Georgia. She had 2 previous marriages, one to a real estate developer in Dallas who had filed for divorce after discovering irregularities in their joint finances, and one to a retired tech executive in Seattle who had settled out of court after a dispute that his attorneys had sealed under a confidentiality agreement. In both cases, the marriages had lasted between 18 months and 3 years. In both cases, the men had been wealthy, recently widowed or divorced, and emotionally cautious, exactly like Marcus. In both cases, she had made quiet financial inroads before the marriages unraveled, and in both cases, she had walked away with enough to sustain a comfortable lifestyle while she identified the next target. The pattern was documented. The forensic team laid it out in a timeline that covered 11 years and 3 states. And then they found the network. Because here is what made Marcus's case different from the 2 that came before it. Vanessa had not been working alone. She had never been working alone. Behind the warmth and the navy dress and the genuine seeming questions and the patient 2-year courtship, there was a coordinated team of 3 people. A financial advisor named Derek, who had quietly inserted himself into Marcus's professional orbit through a mutual contact 8 months before the gala where Marcus met Vanessa, the gala that, it turned out, Vanessa had arranged to attend specifically because Derek had told her Marcus would be there. A woman named Claire who had joined Marcus's company as a mid-level operations analyst 14 months earlier and who had been feeding Derek information about Marcus's internal account structures, travel schedules, and financial teams rotation. And a 4th person, a lawyer, whose name the investigators were still working on tracing through offshore incorporation records in the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands. The wedding was not the target. The wedding was the door. The real target was long-term access to Marcus's equity holdings, a controlling structure worth, across all vehicles, north of $400 million. The transfer on the wedding night had been a test run. A small probe to confirm that the access clause she had negotiated into the joint account structure actually worked. The real move was planned for 6 months later, structured in stages, designed to look like authorized distributions from a trust. If Marcus hadn't seen that screen, if he had closed the laptop without looking, he might never have known until it was too late. Now, here is where I want to pause and ask you something directly. Because this is not just a story about a billionaire. Think about the people in your own life who you've trusted completely. A partner. A friend. A business associate. Someone who seemed so right, so genuine, so perfectly aligned with what you needed at a vulnerable moment in your life. Have you ever considered that the very things that drew you to them, the way they listened, the way they never pushed, the way they always seemed to understand, could be skills that someone practiced? Not feelings. Skills. Because that is what the investigators kept saying about Vanessa. She was not a cold person. She was not emotionally distant. She was genuinely warm. And that was the most dangerous thing about her. The investigators found themselves, professionals who had spent careers looking at fraud cases, occasionally having to remind each other that warmth is not the same as authenticity. And that is a lesson that cuts far deeper than any courtroom. By the time Marcus had the full picture, he had been married for 22 days. Vanessa was still playing the role. She was warm. She was attentive. She was talking about redoing one of the guest rooms and asking his opinion on paint colors. She had no idea what was happening below the surface. And Marcus, disciplined, precise, relentless Marcus, let her keep talking about paint colors. Because he needed 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks for the forensic accountants to complete the offshore asset tracing. 2 more weeks for Sandra to build a civil fraud case strong enough to survive the scrutiny that would come with his name on the filing. 2 more weeks for the investigators to confirm the identity of the 4th person in the network, the lawyer, whose name, when it finally came through, caused Sandra to close her office door and sit quietly for a full 5 minutes before calling Marcus. It was someone Vanessa had introduced to Marcus's legal circle 3 months before the wedding. Someone who had attended the wedding itself. Someone Marcus had shaken hands with and thanked for coming. The betrayal was not just intimate. It was architectural. Every element had been designed to be invisible inside the structures of trust that already existed in Marcus's life. And the thing that kept him up at night, the thing he would later describe as the strangest part of all of it, was that even knowing everything he knew, there were still moments, small, involuntary moments, when he looked at Vanessa across the breakfast table and felt something real. Not love, exactly. But the memory of what he had believed love to be. And that ghost of feeling was the cruelest part of all. On the 31st day of their marriage, Marcus called Vanessa into his study. It was a Sunday evening. The house was quiet. He had a folder on the desk in front of him, closed. He poured her a glass of water, not wine, water, and set it beside her chair. She sat down. She looked at him and must have read something in the room because her composure tightened almost imperceptibly. He opened the folder. He set out the documents one by one without speaking. The shell companies. The transfer request. The account access history. The photographs of her meetings with Derek. The employment records for Claire. The timeline of her 2 previous marriages. Her real name. She looked at every document. She did not cry. She did not deny it. She sat very still, and when he finished laying out the papers, she looked up at him and said, in a voice that was quieter than he expected, "What do you want?" And Marcus said, "Nothing from you." She believed he would handle it privately. She believed that a man of his standing would protect his own reputation above everything. She believed that the scandal of a public fraud case would damage him more than it would damage her. She had calculated that the embarrassment of being deceived would keep him quiet. She had calculated that his pride was his most exploitable weakness. She had miscalculated one thing. Marcus Hale was not a man who made decisions out of pride. He was a man who had spent 40 years making decisions out of principle. And the principle that guided him now was not revenge. It was accountability. 6 days after the confrontation in his study, his attorneys filed a civil fraud lawsuit in federal court, naming Vanessa Carver Hale, Derek, Claire, and the fourth network member. The filing was public record. Within 48 hours, 3 investigative journalists had the story. By the end of that week, it was national news. Vanessa's legal team moved immediately to push a counternarrative, that she was the victim of a powerful man trying to silence a woman who knew too much about his financial dealings. It was a calculated move. And for about 72 hours, it had traction. Some commentators on social media ran with it. A few opinion columns were published. The framing spread. Marcus had anticipated this. Sandra had anticipated this. The forensic team had anticipated this. The evidence package they released to the press was precise and comprehensive. Not a flood of information, a surgical release. The shell company incorporation dates. The employment records. The prior marriage court filings from Dallas and Seattle. The timeline of Derek's introduction into Marcus's professional circle. Piece by piece, over 4 days, the evidence made the counternarrative impossible to sustain. It collapsed not with drama but with the quiet weight of documented truth. And then Marcus did the thing that no one saw coming. The thing that his attorney described as the most psychologically precise decision I have ever seen a client make. He made a public donation of $10 million, the exact cost of the wedding, to a national nonprofit focused on financial fraud education and victim support for survivors of relationship-based financial exploitation. The donation was made in the name of the Carver Family Foundation. Vanessa's real family name. Publicly. The effect was immediate and total. Her carefully constructed public image, which her legal team had been trying to leverage, became, overnight, a source of scrutiny rather than sympathy. Every connection she had built over 2 years of operating as Vanessa Cole collapsed under the weight of a single question: who is Vanessa Carver? The network disappeared. Derek resigned from his firm before charges were formally served. Claire was terminated and cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced civil penalty. The fourth member, the lawyer, entered a separate settlement. Vanessa's legal challenge to the divorce filing was dropped within 60 days. Under fraud provisions in the prenuptial agreement that Sandra had insisted remain in the final version despite Vanessa's resistance, there was no settlement. No payout. The divorce was finalized on the 89th day of their marriage. Marcus's financial structure was intact. His reputation, rather than being damaged by the public case, became associated with a different narrative, one of a man who refused to be silenced, who turned betrayal into accountability, who took the most painful moment of his personal life and used it to protect other people from the same thing. He called Robert the night the divorce was finalized. Robert asked him how he felt. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Like myself again." He went back to work the following Monday. He called his mother on Sunday. He still drives himself in most mornings. 55:00, 60:00, the close. Sometimes the most dangerous betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look cold or calculated or cruel. It comes dressed in warmth. It comes in the form of someone who listens when no one else does. Someone who shows up at exactly the right moment. Someone who gives you, after years of grief or loneliness or quiet guarding, the feeling that maybe the world is safe again after all. And that particular vulnerability, is not a weakness. It is what it means to be human. Marcus was not foolish. He was not naive. He was a man who had loved someone truly, lost her, carried that loss for years, and finally allowed himself to feel something again. And that courage, the courage to trust after grief, is not something to be ashamed of. It is one of the bravest things a person can do. What he should be credited with is what he did after. Not the lawsuit. Not the donation. The part where he did not let what happened to him close him permanently. He still calls his mother on Sundays. Now I want to ask you directly, because you've watched this far, and that means this story reached something in you. Would you have seen the red flags? Be honest with yourself. Because most of us want to say yes. But most of us, in the same position, at the same emotional moment, after the same years of careful, patient building, most of us would have felt exactly what Marcus felt. And that is the whole point. Is love ever truly safe at that level of wealth, at that level of visibility, at that level of vulnerability? And was he right to go public? Some people say he should have handled it quietly and moved on. Others say that going public was the only way to stop her from doing it to someone else. What do you think? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because I genuinely read every single one, and I want to know where you stand. And here is the question that will stay with you tonight, the one I want you to sit with. If this had happened to someone you loved, a parent, a sibling, a friend who had been through grief and finally let someone in, how would you feel watching them go through what Marcus went through? How would you feel knowing that the person sitting across from them at every dinner, every quiet Sunday, every moment of genuine vulnerability, had been running a calculation the entire time? Let that sit. Because it is not just about money. It has never been about money. It is about what it costs a person to trust again after they have already lost everything once. And what it means when that trust is used as a weapon. Marcus paid $10 million for a wedding. He paid 31 days of his life for a marriage. But what he got back, his clarity, his integrity, his refusal to be reduced, that is worth more than anything on any financial dashboard. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you want to call someone you love and tell them to be careful, like this video right now so that YouTube knows you want more real stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the next story we're telling is one that will hit even harder. It is the story of a billionaire who trusted his own brother with everything, his empire, his legacy, his children's future, and paid the ultimate price. That video goes up next. You do not want to miss it. And comment below, tell me your thoughts on Marcus. Tell me what you would have done differently. Tell me if you saw something in this story that reminded you of your own life. I am reading every comment. Every one. See you in the next one.